Hi, Vas. Thanks for joining me and thanks for joining the GTM Tech Week. To our guests, we're going to talk today about memory and about building your company brain and how you can amplify your go to market activities with a consistent memory with AI that remembers your whole context. My first question, I hear a lot from people registering to the event and from my peer founders, and this is something what I also has been struggling for the last 2 years is that I try AI for outreach, but it's a garbage. Then I iterate it and it's a garbage. But then I figure out some kind of a way to work through it and iterate correctly. And then I need to reimagine it every single time for the new campaign. Or the same with offer creation. I create a workflow, I create a skill for creating presentation for the client to show the whole offer. But then when the new contacts come in, I'm lost and I'm doing this all over again. As you spent last 2 to 3 years building AI memory, can you tell us what's broken about how companies use AI today?
Yeah, thanks for having me, first of all, and I'm looking forward to the workshop. I'm Wes, I'm founder of Cognee. I've been building a memory for 2, 3 years. My background is in data engineering, cognitive sciences. Now, in terms of why I started with memory, had the same exact problem like you did. I created an app to personalize my habits and give me suggestions on what should I do in day to day, and I could not really make it work for other people after I set up my own workflow. I realized that the context not only gets lost, but that I didn't have a right way to store the context, manage it, and share it across all the different patterns of usage I was doing. And as humans, we have 75 ways of doing something, and every individual likes their own little way of doing a particular operation. But just managing that, sharing that, and contextualizing that is a really difficult problem. And LLMs are not designed for that. LLMs have no state, they forget as soon as you interact with them. They only run when you tell them, and they run a specific job at specific time, just in that context they live in. But they don't really understand that there is much more nuance in the world, and that's something we're going to solve.
But if you look at some most popular harnesses like Claude or like Codex, then there is some kind of a built-in memory, and you can work in projects, you can work in specific folders. Why it's not enough? Like, what's the primary reason that you cannot just use your Codex or Claude app to have your memory?
Yeah, well, when Cloud Code leaked and we all got to see the source code, one could understand that the agentic loop is not that complex to make, but that the 70% of what the code contained was like kind of ways of making sure that loop stays on track, right? That's the hard problem. And Cloud Code loop and the Cloud Code types of problems it solves are those of coding and of pretty much managing data within a certain folder or a repo. Now with their other products, you can share the data, you can have it across the system, you can do more complex operations. But in essence, it's a wrapper around API, which is still an LLM, as smart as it is. It just doesn't really have any context or understanding of your own system, except if you give it those MD files. Now, what people started doing, and where I see a problem with this approach, is that okay, I have a really smart API, I have a really smart model. Now I have like a set of files I'm using, and these files are instructing the model basically how to act. But the real world situation is often enough that you're not going to have only one folder, you're going to have 10,000 folders. You're going to have hundreds of gigabytes of data, and you're going to have very domain specific knowledge. Even if you don't have that much data, you will have like very specific ways of how you're doing things. So what you're going to end up doing is you're going to be continuously updating some files that will need to have your context to solve your problem in a certain way, and you're again not going to be have you're not going to have a flexible system. So that's why I think there is a really big space for us to innovate here.
So what I hear is that without the great memory, you're gonna still generate slop and generic AI answers to offers or to you're gonna just sound generic.
Yeah, and even if you give it as many instructions as you want, then your instructions are living in different parts of the system. So now you need to make sure that these are updated and consolidated. So you end up with making much more work for yourself than you should. So if you have memory and if that memory is keeping track of where is what and how are things updated and what's happening, you're moving forward. So it's like Excel spreadsheets versus a database. You can turn an Excel spreadsheet into a database, but you're kind of reinventing the wheels.
Okay. Okay. The current development and hype, especially in San Francisco where we've met, is around building a company brain. This is like a concept introduced by first by Andrei Karpathy on the LLM Wiki, then popularized by Gary Tan with his G brain. You were studying real brains as a cognitive scientist or psychologist where LLMs appeared. So what is your like what right now people in software industry are missing about the concept of a brain compared to how we memorize things, how we connect them to each other? How's that different now, and what's the way to mimic like senior sales rep or the best key account executive into a skill inside your cloud workflow?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what I often enough see is like people name things brain, but they are very far from the brain, right? So what Gary Tran's product does is it stores data again in files, and these files are just read by the LLM. It's just effectively a file system search that is kind of navigating a very complex set of files that are continuously being generated. Other systems like RAG systems are more computer science based, like, hey, I'm going to look for similar items here. It's a novel way of search. But again, what it lacks is any type of consolidated approach across large data sets with different types of connections and interlinks. So what cognitive science does, and where I started this with, was that it assumes that there is an effective set of connections between certain objects or entities or relationships, and that these effectively are very layered sets of objects that then surface in your consciousness, and you can do certain set of operations as they get activated. So this activation of memories, this forgetting of memories, these recall of memories, and kind of propagating those patterns in certain ways and forms is something that I still see missing. And especially because these systems that we see, they assume that the company brain is a static thing. You just kind of load with the data, you keep that way, and it's done once it's done. But the problem with these systems is they need to be evolving, continuous learning systems that continuously change and update based on the interaction. And that's what we are doing. And we assume that there is going to be a fit function of like that's already modeled in cognitive sciences, that you can say, hey, this is the function, an objective reward function or whatever you want, that is actually visible to the user, that you can tweak, that's going to give you the right set of parameters and responses based on your interaction with the system, and it's going to change the system back. Whereas right now what I see is that, hey, this is just some brain-like structure, but it lacks that like loop, that self-improvement loop that agents now are starting to get, but the memory is still not having.
Okay, so with the correct phrasing of brain, you would be able to iterate, let's say, on your outreach. Once you know what's working, it should auto-populate your memory into what kind of hooks worked, what are the new patterns that the AI has found that are generating you the replies, what works on LinkedIn, what works on mails. But how do you even like build a company brain? Like, where do you start with? Because I see that there is a big difference between an AI that knows your company and AI that just searches your documents. Because if let's say you're doing a campaign in Clay, or you gather signals from different tools and you put it into a markdown, and then you say like, okay, use it for the next activities. But what's the difference between knowing the company and searching the company, and how do you start setting this up?
Yeah, so that's what we call an ontology. Ontology is this representation of knowledge within a company and the definitions of certain entities and business processes. We've seen different ways to set those up. We have a system internally where we can auto infer how the ontology is looking like based on our previous experience with different clients. And that's something that, for example, we took us 2 months to do in the end of 2024. And now we did it in 1 day for a client in Voice AI to create it effectively across their data silos and everything, because the product just matured and we have like already internal tools. So we know how to push this forward. Effectively, this ontology is like a set of relationships and concepts that are particular to a certain business. And then we can find those, map those. When you say a business year, we know it, you mean that it starts on March 3rd, maybe, because that's how your accounting is set up. Or when you say revenue, we know it's EBITDA. Or where you say, hour, it means a subsidiary in Germany and Poland together. So this is effective set of mapping and connections we do. And then we connect that to the data that comes from the other systems like, CRMs or data warehouses or unstructured data like PDFs. And we create a grounding of that data in memory. And we create also a certain set of prioritization where when you're searching that data, you can find weights and importance of certain elements and files as you interact with them. So that's how the company brain from our perspective starts. And then as you interact with it, it evolves, changes and updates. But what you are mentioning there is that, in a sense, a company brain should be able to plug in from any data source. So any type of database or a system of record, and it should also be able to plug into any agent, and a human should also be able to correct it when it doesn't get things, and it should be able to correct it once, and it should learn from that for the future. So that's where we are kind of going with our product direction, and what I'm seeing also others are starting to accept now.
So let's say I have my CRM records, I have my emails context, and then I have my Excel with my revenue targets. I upload this to AI and it figures out itself how the brain should work, or does it require me to spend a lot of time on setting up the definitions, setting up the metrics, and where am I involved to make sure that, you haven't just figured out something for me that's totally off the true? Like, where is my control?
Yeah, so you see on top, so you ingest the data and everything is done automatically, and you go and inspect like a visualization that says like, hey, this is your kind of, if this is how AI understood your view of the world, and correct this or correct that, and then you know what needs fixing. We're now from our side working also on making that part of the UI, so you can effectively like also say in the UI, hey, I don't like that, or I want this changed. But that's the control surface, right? So you don't want to go into the code and change it. You want your agents to change the code, and you just want to say to the agents like, hey, this is like where I see or expect the change to happen. And that's pretty much that. That's
Okay.
kind of
And it doesn't require any like proficiency in coding to see it and understand it.
No, there was a few hackathons we've done recently where we saw that no one's really coding anymore. Everyone's using Cloud Code or Codex to code. So what we give people is skills. They can just copy paste those skills and the keys, and they can use our cloud product or our open source product, and they can start building these by themselves. And the only thing they need to see is this visualization piece to understand conceptually how the connections were made, and that's understandable to anyone, whoever saw a diagram in their life.
Okay. And can you give some kind of an idea how Working Brain works based on your client implementations, like end to end, what kind of efficiency it gives for individuals or for the whole organizations? Does it just make it better, or does it make it faster, or does it help with retention of knowledge once people go out? Like, what are the immediate benefits that you see for when the brain is implemented?
Yeah, so for example, this client that recently came to us in the voice AI that needed this sales data analyzed, right? So first of all, the token consumption was reduced. Like we could keep like the search at 50,000 tokens, whereas your Cloud Code's going to go into millions of tokens just trying to figure out, read. And then again, I have to do that in 2 weeks. If you didn't forget your session ID, probably you will forget it. So you'll have to restart. The second piece is the accuracy, right? So the accuracy goes up, right? A lot. We will announce benchmarks in a couple of days on the level of accuracy, but I would say that by default, compared to the naive LLM, I need to check the numbers, but probably 40% or so you have the accuracy bump, which is very significant compared to just LLM trying to grab and search through things. And then finally, what you also have is this ability to control your data. So what we see with our clients is that, I don't want to send my data to someone else's system. Anthropic just pulled the recent model the other day. You don't want that to happen to you with all of your data sitting on their cloud. What might be better option is that you control the data, you control the models, you control the databases, and then you effectively have control over everything else. And what we've seen with this client is They loaded CRM data, they loaded all kinds of different data sources. We created this mind map or a knowledge graph or however you want to call it. And then they could finally answer the questions they needed. So they got the accuracy, they got the speed, meaning that effectively now they don't have to always reprocess the same thing for 20 minutes like your coding tools would do. And it's going to take less than a second for a search, or even like few hundred milliseconds if you optimize it.
So how I see it for like a CEO or a GTM leader, it means that with setting up correctly the brain, you can give access to the exact data that you want inside and outside of your organization. So you're not worried that you're gonna release like board meetings notes to an intern, right? And it also means that you can iterate faster on the knowledge, and you don't need to have like proficiency in coding to really make sure that you're safe with what AI knows about you and what is the source of truth. So you don't need to figure it out yourself if you have the brain set up correctly, right? Okay. So last question to the people who are listening to us and who will attend the workshops. In practical terms, for GTM leaders, they're gonna spend like 3 or 4 hours with you. What they're gonna work out and end of the day, what kind of setup they will have, and how they can apply it week after at their job.
Yeah, so I think what they will come with is understanding of how to use their cloud code and their tools and the patterns they've had. What they'll come out with is like, hey, I now know how to step by step set my own company brain, like how to connect my data, how to load it, and how to do that myself without having to ask anyone for help, and how to start actually pulling that data with my other automation workflows so I can effectively start engaging the audiences, reaching out and have better messages and everything that they need to accomplish their work better, and also how to kind of visualize it and how to see that this works, and how to understand how the data was connected.
Okay, perfect. So thanks a lot and see you.
Bye bye.
Bye.